So picking up where we left off in the last video concerning the material editor, I'm just going to keep going here and keep talking about the material editor. So I'm going to delete that color node from before, and we're going to look at some other stuff here. So we're going to look at creating these nodes. So you've noticed I've been creating nodes like the panner node, texture coordinate nodes. I've got these nodes down here, all kinds of stuff. So where in the world do I get that stuff? How do I create it? And what is that stuff? All of these nodes are actually called expressions. They're expression nodes. This main node over here that everything connects to is the main material node. This is the actual master material. Everything else is a node that plugs into that master material in one way or another. Depending on what you want to do, you may have a simple material network like this with just a handful of nodes, or you may have a network with hundreds of nodes. Really depends on what you want to do. If I look over here in the palette panel on the right, you'll see that we have this huge list of different expressions and functions and different things. And the list is massive. It's very overwhelming for somebody who is completely new to creating shaders in Unreal. So just don't worry about it. Don't let it overwhelm you. You're not going to use every single one of these nodes, okay? And no one knows every single node. There's just too many, as you can see. So to navigate this, you can hold down the right mouse button and drag up and down, or you can just use the mouse scroll wheel and go up and down like any other list. And what this is going to show you is all the material expressions and functions that are available right now in Unreal in your current editor. Alright? Now, one way of creating these nodes or these expressions in your graph is to simply click on one of these guys, and then you can drag it onto your graph. So you can see that we have this constant 3 vector over here. If I click and drag, I can drop it right in here, and I can click and drag and drop any of these guys, and that'll create these expressions for me automatically. So let me delete that stuff. You can also do a search. So if you know what you're looking for, instead of digging through this long list of stuff, which is alphabetically ordered, by the way, you can just start to type in a name. Like if I wanted to find a Fresnel node, I could see that as I start to type in Fresnel, it's going to be filtered out and isolated. Then all I just got to do is grab it, drag and drop it into my graph, and I can get to work. I'll click on a little X to cancel out the search, and that brings back my huge field over here, my huge list. If I go up to the category button, I actually have a couple of options here. I can filter this out by expressions or functions. So expressions are kind of basic nodes, and they do all kinds of stuff. Functions are more complicated nodes. You can think of them as a node that contains a whole bunch of different nodes inside of it to create some kind of complex functionality. And that could be a lot of different things, too many things to name right now off the top of my head. But functions are really important. They're also more expensive to render out than a regular expression, just because they usually have a bunch of stuff calculating inside of them. And it could be math, it could be procedural movements, it could be all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to set my category back to all. So another way that you can create nodes in the material editor, the second way, and there's 3 ways in total, we just saw the first way, is to use a right-click menu. And this is pretty cool because it's a little bit more advanced, but it's similar to viewing the list that's in the palette panel by just right-clicking an empty space. And when you do that, you get this context menu, and you notice we have all these categories that are collapsed right now. So if I look at atmosphere, you'll notice that, hey, we've got an atmosphere category over here in the palette panel. Same thing with blends, color, there's all the same categories. That's because this right-click menu is showing you the same exact thing that's available in the palette menu. Alright? So it's basically a way of opening up the palette menu a little bit quicker and easier just by right-clicking. And then what you could do is click on a node, and it's automatically going to create that node wherever you have right-clicked the mouse in your material editor graph. So what I could also do is start to type in the name of something, and it's going to filter it out. Very similar to the palette panel search field, we can just quickly right-click, start typing in a name, and then click on that node that you need, drop it in here, and get it done. So the third method of creating nodes is actually the most advanced method. And right off the bat, you're not going to know how to do this if you're completely new to this. But the third method is using hotkeys, which is the method that I prefer to use. Once you start memorizing the hotkeys, for example, you can hit T and then click. That's going to create a texture sample node. If you hold down the P for panner, you'll create a panner node. If you hold down A, you'll create an add node. M, you'll create a multiply. I can also create parameter nodes. I can create all kinds of different nodes if I know the shortcuts. So at first you won't know the shortcuts. If I hold down 1, I'll create a 1 vector, 2 will create a 2 vector, 3 will create a 3 vector, so on and so forth. So I use a lot of hotkeys in my workflow. And if you look over here in the palette list, you'll see that next to constant, we have a 1, constant 2 vector has a 2, 3 vector has a 3, 4 vector has a 4. Those numbers are shortcut keys on the keyboard. So if you hold down 1 and then left click anywhere inside your graph, wherever you left clicked, you're going to create a constant node, which the hotkey is 1. If you hold down 2, you'll create a constant 2 vector. If you hold down 4, you'll create a constant 4 vector, so on and so forth. So the way to learn the shortcut keys is actually pretty easy. Just look on the palette list on the right, and you can see the hotkeys that are associated with those objects. So you can see the panner node's hotkey is a P, the texture coordinate node is a U, and if we scroll down, we can see a lot more hotkeys with different nodes. This is extremely useful because, well, if you have really good memory, you can just memorize what the hotkeys are and create nodes really fast. Now over here on the left, we've got the details panel. This is pretty important. This has information on whatever you have selected. Very similar to the detail panel inside of the editor, the Unreal Editor viewport. Okay, so right now, if I click on the metallic node, you're going to see the details of the metallic node pop up. If I click on a roughness node, you'll see the roughness parameters. And if I go back to the viewport right, I've got a details panel on the right that we've already seen in a previous video. If I select the static mesh here in my viewport, the little sphere, I'll see the information in the details panel. So this works exactly the same way. Click a node, like this texture node or this panner node, and you're going to see the parameters over here on the left in the details panel. And then you can change the parameters if there's any parameters that you can change. Each node's going to have a different set of parameters. So for example, the panner node has different settings compared to, say, a texture sample node or anything else. Now, if we click an empty space and deselect everything, we'll see some more parameters over here on the left. And those are the parameters of the material node itself, the master material node. If we click on the material node itself, we'll still get the details panel over here. So just something to keep in mind. Now, these details here from the material are pretty important. They change the way the material behaves, how it works, what it does, and how it does it. And we're going to be going over this stuff in a little bit more detail later on. But right now, I just want you to be aware that the details panel is where you change parameters, settings, and the behavior of a material. Not these little expression nodes, but the main material node itself, which is pretty important. You got to know that. So one way to learn how to create complex materials is to look at materials themselves. If I go ahead and I open up a material here that comes with a shooter game example, and this is just an instance material, which I'll talk about in a later video, but if I open up this material, I can see it's got some complex stuff going on here, and it's actually commented for me. This is because somebody at Epic Games created this material and documented and commented the material, which is actually really good practice. That way, if anyone else on your team has to see the material and edit it, adjust it, or create a material similar to it, they can look at the example, they can understand it, reverse engineer it, and then create their own. So the best way to learn about materials is to get in there, get your hands dirty, see how other materials are put together, and then use that to try to create your own materials from scratch.